take freedom away from the American people, you're playing with fire. And I intend to pour some gasoline.
They brought this war to our shores!
Do you like alternate history, dystopic sci-fi, and killing Nazis? Then boy is Wolfenstein up your alley. Machine Games delivered a remarkably strong reboot to the long-standing series a few years ago with The New Order, and now they're back to take us to their grim alternate version of the 1960s, where the Nazis won World War II. It's a great premise and an amazing setting for a game, and for the most part Wolfenstein 2 The New Colossus is a bombastic sequel, but it's not without its flaws. The story picks up literally seconds after the events of the first, with Blaskowitz being loaded onto a stretcher and given some pretty DIY surgery after an explosive raid on a Nazi base. A lot of the story is told through cutscenes, which would be a problem in most other games, but the direction of these cinematics is so considered, you'll never want to skip them.
Keys. Run.
The campaign feels varied and exciting. You'll get to kill Nazis in a wheelchair, on a train, and in bombed out American districts. That said, the first hour of the game gets a little stale visually. First you're in a submarine, then an airship that looks like a submarine, and then you're back in the submarine, but it's a bit orange this time. It's a real breath of fresh air to finally go somewhere different though, and after that speed hump the game really gets going, taking you on a journey full of surprising and tense moments.
I read here that you operate out of Station 6. What is the location of Station 6? I'm unfamiliar with this station.
Alongside your goal to reunite the American people in an anti-Nazi uprising, your objective is to neutralise the charismatic Nazi commander Frau Engel. She turned up briefly in the first game, but now she takes centre stage and is despicable to the core. Her presence is always threatening, and it's hard to take your eyes off her any time she's on screen. It's sad to say then that after a strong first impression, the game loses a bit of its momentum after the first half. The whole game is spent building towards this huge revolution, it's all the characters seem to talk about. You get more and more stoked to participate in a full-on civil uprising of sorts, but the game just kind of ends before you really get there. I was actually quite surprised when the credits start rolling, since the story felt like it had another hour or two in it, but the game just ends without any boss fight or any semblance of a climactic moment. There is a small incentive to replay the game after its brief runtime, since you get to re-pick the fate of one of the central characters from the first game, thus taking you along a different timeline. Cutscenes will be a little different, and you'll get an exclusive weapon from each character, but they don't have a huge impact on the experience. Basically, pick Fergus if you like the film Trainspotting for the Scottish cussing and dialogue, and pick Wyatt if you like Trainspotting for the, other reasons. In fact, the real saving grace of the game's story are its characters, none more so than BJ Blaskowitz himself. At a glance he seems to be the physical embodiment of the video game and film tough guy, but he subverts almost every other expectation. You start the game off in a wheelchair, and only later he regains the ability to walk thanks to a power suit, but Blaskowitz is still effectively handicapped, and he knows it. Frequently he's completely emasculated, and if you look down at certain points, you see he even has to pee in a bag. It's depressing to see a video game giant in this position. He's everything he needs to be when he's in front of his peers, but during brief section when he's alone, he intimately expresses his fears to the player. Certain chapters also go back to explore Blaskowitz's childhood, and they do an excellent job of giving one of gaming's most two-dimensional characters a legitimate and powerful backstory. The game's writing as a whole is a real step above its contemporaries. While not as bleak as The New Order, this game manages to balance its crazy Inglourious Bastard-esque portions with some touching moments about how war can tear families apart. It straddles the line between camp and melodrama without ever overtly exploiting its Nazis in America setting for mere shock value. Sci-fi Nazis is always a fun bit of alternative history to play with, but the devs have really gone all out in crafting a fully realised world. Film and propaganda posters litter walls, and you won't go for more than a few minutes without finding an old postcard or letter to loved one to read. And for the first time in ages, I actually found myself reading through some of these because the universe is so fleshed out. It even goes as far to invent a world where the original Wolfenstein game exists, but as an alternate version where you can play as a Nazi escaping from a rebel camp, and all the posters of Hitler have been swapped out with mugshots of Blaskowitz. It's just a cute Easter egg, but it ends up adding so much more credibility to this world. Whoever thought of it deserves a medal. One of the game's highlights is a playable, non-violent exploration section around downtown Roswell, where you can walk around and indulge in the what-if scenario of Nazis ruling America. It's an interesting space to walk around in, and thorough explorers are treated to snippets of conversation that extend the game's lore further. It's a pity it's only a few minutes long, since it's almost as good as the opening section of Bioshock Infinite. From a visual standpoint, the game is a stunner. Lighting does most of the heavy lifting, casting moody shadows on most environments and making the metal on Nazi armour and your guns glisten coldly. My jaw dropped when I saw this metal melting effect, hence why I did it so many times when I captured this footage. Just look at that. The colour palette in general is a lot more vibrant and attractive, and again a lot of effort has gone into crafting a world that feels lived in. And you know what always gets points from me? Torso sight. And in some cases, you can see your own shadow, which casts a near one-to-one representation of your actions. And I tell you, it's the little things that get me. The attention to detail extends to the violence too, and it wouldn't be a Wolfenstein game without a hearty dose of blood. In the previous game, Blaskowitz carried a knife for close quarter kills, but this time he's packing a hatchet.
A lot of things you can do with a hatchet. And a Nazi.
And he's not afraid to use it in some of the most savage ways imaginable. Not content with that, then pull out your shotgun and take some meaty chunks off your enemies. It's hard to feel bad though, because you know, they're Nazis, and sometimes other bad men. And there's plenty of ways to kill anyone who stands in your way. Weapons run the gambit: pistols, submachine guns, assault rifles and shotguns, all of which can be dual wielded, which is as hilarious as it is devastating. Best of all, if you can't pick a favourite gun, you can mix and match any combination and go akimbo so you can play any way you want to. Some bigger guns are scattered around and these are great fun to use. It's never not gratifying to melt Nazis into goo with a giant laser beam. During certain sections, going stealth is sometimes an option. Getting a perfectly silent kill feels amazing, but you'll often be lucky to kill more than 1 or 2 Nazis before the alarm is raised and you'll have to go loud. It's a shame though, because the game has laid out a really good blueprint for stealth with some generally solid mechanics, but the level design and the fact the guards apparently have telepathy and amazing vision just doesn't make sneaking a viable option. I kept a shotgun at the ready with my silenced pistol so I was prepared to deal with the onslaught the moment I messed up even slightly. No, I've been spotted. However you choose to dispose of the fascists, it all contributes to levelling up a variety of perks. The abilities they grant aren't game-changing, but you'll certainly feel stronger by the end of the game. Similarly, guns can be upgraded by finding kits scattered around the environment, and these can dramatically alter a weapon's function, adding a scope or even fire bullets to some guns. Blaskowitz himself later gets some robotic upgrades that augment your base abilities. They're a fun addition, but they don't add as much to the gameplay as they're hyped up to. Fundamentally, the shooting is good, it's solid, it's fun, but it always feels slightly neutered by the overarching level design. Instead of missions taking you through a lot of varied and individual rooms, Wolfenstein 2 feels more like you're going through multiple corridors. Rooms lack individuality, and your sense of place and progression is hindered by that. It never quite makes you experience deja vu, but missions often blur into one when you replay them back in your mind. In a way, that's kind of indicative of my feelings towards Wolfenstein 2 as a whole. It feels like it's continuously moving through a corridor, building and building towards something great at the end. But it never quite delivers, especially after such a strong first half. It's weird to be in a position where you wished you liked a game more than you actually did. The rushed ending and occasionally unmemorable level design really hurt the game, but the scripted sections are incredible. And in some other unexpected places the game really shines, and it shines bright enough to make a game I like, but don't love. The New Order had its flaws too, but they were borderline endearing there, in the same way the first Witcher game was. Now that it's come down to a sequel, the team have been given a chance to tighten up some of the previous game's issues, but a lot of them have stuck around for the sequel, and they're slightly less forgiving this time around. If you're planning on diving into Wolfenstein 2 with huge expectations, you'll probably feel a bit disappointed. If you're willing to embrace some of its shortcomings though, there's still a lot to like about BJ Blazkowicz's next chapter.